There's a moment in every life when you witness something that shifts your entire perspective, something so unexpected that it shakes you to your core. Picture this: a father, a man who's just had a long, exhausting day, sitting at a restaurant with his family, growing more and more frustrated as the minutes tick by. The waiter, though friendly and apologetic, seems to be moving in slow motion, and the father's patience begins to wear thin. His voice, rising in anger, echoes through the quiet restaurant as he scolds the young waiter, accusing him of being lazy, unprofessional, and completely inept. But just when it seems like the situation can't get any worse, something catches the father's eye: a medal hanging on the wall, an unassuming piece of decoration that will change everything. If you've ever felt frustration bubble up inside you, if you've ever been quick to judge a situation without understanding what's truly going on, then this story will speak to you on a deeper level. You'll want to keep watching, not just because you're curious about what happens next, but because it's a story that could change the way you see the world, one small, humbling moment at a time. We've all been there, haven't we? That point where stress and fatigue blur our judgment, and we take our frustrations out on the world around us. It's easy to point fingers and make snap judgments when things aren't going our way. We've all had those moments when we're hungry, tired, and just want things to move faster. But what if that waiter wasn't just some random server? What if he was doing more than just taking orders and delivering food? What if there was more to him than meets the eye, a deeper story that no one knew about, a story that could change everything? Stay with me here because this is where it gets really interesting. As the father's words continue to sting, the waiter silently walks away, his face betraying no emotion. But as the father's gaze drifts around the restaurant, something catches his attention: a small, almost hidden medal hanging on the wall. At first, it seems like just another decoration, another piece of memorabilia that blends in with the rest of the restaurant's decor. But there's something about it, something that makes the father pause. You see, this isn't just any medal. This is a symbol of honor, bravery, and sacrifice, something that would completely shift the way the father sees this young man, his slow service, and the judgment he's just passed. But the story doesn't end there. Not by a long shot. In fact, the more the father thinks about that medal, the more questions begin to swirl in his mind. How could someone with such a distinguished past end up serving tables in a small, local diner? What story was behind that medal, and more importantly, why had it been so casually placed on the wall, almost like it was an afterthought? This is the moment that will make you rethink everything you know about people, about judgment, and about the hidden stories that lie just beneath the surface. As you watch the father's journey unfold, you'll find yourself questioning your own assumptions, your own reactions when things don't go as planned, and wondering just how often we misjudge others based on a small glimpse into their lives. The thing is, we never truly know someone's story until we take the time to look beyond the surface. The father's journey is a reminder that every person we encounter, whether it's a waiter, a stranger on the street, or even someone who frustrates us, has a life, a history, and experiences that are often hidden from view. In a world where we are constantly moving at breakneck speed, it's all too easy to fall into the trap of making snap judgments based on incomplete information. But what happens when we stop, slow down, and truly look at the bigger picture? This is where the power of this story lies. It's not just about a father scolding a waiter for being slow. It's about what happens next, when that same father is forced to confront his own actions, his own assumptions, and his own biases. And trust me, what comes next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about judging others, about empathy, and about the power of second chances. By now, you're probably wondering, what's the connection between the medal and the father scolding? How does this small, seemingly insignificant object change everything? Well, you're going to have to stick around a little longer to find out. The journey to understanding doesn't just stop with a simple glance at a medal. It's about the deeper layers of human experience that are often hidden from the world. You're probably starting to piece together the mystery, but let me tell you, this story has a twist that you won't see coming. And when the father finally understands the significance of that medal, when he learns the truth behind the waiter's past, it will completely change the way you look at the world around you. It's a moment of realization that will hit you hard, reminding us all that no matter how much we think we know about someone's life, there's always more beneath the surface. So, why does this story matter? Because it speaks to something universal, the human tendency to judge others before understanding their circumstances, the urge to react to frustration without stopping to consider the bigger picture. It reminds us that sometimes the slowest people in our lives aren't necessarily the ones who need to be rushed. They might just be the ones carrying the most weight, the most stories, and the most incredible journeys. Stick with me, because I promise you, the resolution to this story will leave you with a new perspective, a new respect for the people you might have once overlooked. Keep watching to see how the father's journey evolves and how one small, seemingly insignificant moment can lead to a complete change in how we view others. The father sat back in his chair, his eyes still fixated on the metal, the small piece of metal now holding his attention more than anything else in the restaurant. His thoughts swirled like a storm, and he could feel the weight of his frustration shifting to something else entirely. Was he wrong to be upset? Was he being too harsh? The waiter, with his calm demeanor and apparent lack of urgency, had struck a nerve in him that he couldn't quite shake off. But there was something else, something deeper gnawing at him now, as he kept glancing toward the wall. Why would someone with such a clear symbol of honor be working in a place like this, serving food to people who probably didn't even know what that metal meant? The more he tried to rationalize it, the more questions piled up in his mind, questions that, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Before the moment could settle in, the father's phone buzzed on the table, pulling him out of his thoughts. His wife, sitting across from him, noticed the tension in his face, but she didn't say anything. They had been married long enough for her to know when he needed time to process things, but she also knew that once he was worked up, it was hard to reel him back in. The text was from his brother, a quick check-in that seemed almost too casual to be so important. It said, "Hey, just checking in. You good? You seemed off this morning." The words lingered in the air between them, and the father didn't answer immediately. His mind wasn't on his brother right now, not after everything that had happened earlier. No, his thoughts kept returning to the waiter and to that metal on the wall. A moment later, he saw the waiter again, moving toward another table in the far corner of the restaurant. There was no rush in his steps, no hurried movements, just the quiet, deliberate way he went about his work, his head slightly down, his shoulders slumped. He seemed tired, not in the way that comes from a long shift, but in the kind of exhaustion that spoke of something deeper, something much more personal. The father's gaze followed the waiter, and that's when he noticed something odd. The man wasn't wearing any apron, no name tag, no uniform that marked him as a regular employee. For a split second, the father thought maybe he had imagined it. Perhaps the stress of the moment was starting to cloud his vision. But as the waiter moved past the bar and out of view, the father caught a glimpse of something small but unmistakable, a faint scar running down the back of his neck, barely visible beneath his shirt collar. It was the kind of scar that only came from a serious injury. Was it a war wound? A consequence of something more dangerous? The father didn't know, but he couldn't help but feel that something wasn't right. His mind raced again, and with it came more questions. Why was he so curious about the waiter? What had caused this sudden shift in focus? And why was it that a simple, quiet meal with his family was starting to feel like something much more complicated? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just about slow service. It never had been. He had walked into this restaurant expecting a quick meal, a simple dinner to relax after a long day, but now everything felt different. What was it about this waiter, about the way he moved, about the scar on his neck, that felt so off? The father didn't have the answers, but something inside him told him he needed to find out. At that moment, his son, who had been busy looking at his phone, suddenly looked up and spoke in a voice that sounded almost too loud in the quiet of the restaurant. "Dad, do you think he's hiding something?" The question caught the father off guard, and for a split second, he wondered if his son had somehow sensed the unease that had taken over him. The waiter was, of course, a complete stranger to the boy, yet there was a connection, an understanding that only children seem to have. The father didn't respond immediately. Instead, He watched as the waiter made his way back to the kitchen, his back still slightly hunched, his step slow, almost as though he was carrying the weight of the world with him. But then, just as the father was about to turn away, a strange noise broke the silence, a sudden clatter of dishes from the kitchen. The father's attention snapped back to the front of the restaurant, where a large group of people had just walked in, their laughter filling the room. Among them was a woman wearing a designer jacket, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she made her way to a nearby table. She was immediately greeted by the waiter, who gave her a quick smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Something about that exchange struck the father as odd. He had seen enough in his life to know when there was more going on than what appeared on the surface. The woman didn't seem like the type who would sit down and make small talk with a waiter. There was something about the way she carried herself, her sharp gaze, and the way she looked at the waiter, almost like she knew him from somewhere. The father's curiosity deepened. Was this woman somehow connected to the waiter? Was she the reason he was so distracted, so distant? Was there something more to this situation? A hidden relationship that he hadn't yet uncovered? But before he could think too much more about it, the waiter disappeared into the kitchen again, leaving the father with more unanswered questions than ever. By now, the tension in the restaurant was thick, almost palpable. The father could feel his mind racing, the pieces of the puzzle starting to click together, but just as quickly, they seemed to slip out of reach. Was the waiter really just a normal guy with a quiet life, or was there something darker at play here? Was the metal on the wall simply a reminder of a past life, or was it a clue to something far more mysterious? And what about that scar on his neck? Could it be a sign of something deeper, something more dangerous? The father didn't know, but what he did know was that he wasn't going to leave this restaurant without getting answers. As he sat there, his thoughts running wild, he couldn't help but wonder just how far this rabbit hole went. Was he about to uncover a truth that no one else had noticed, or was he simply seeing things that weren't there? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain. The story was just beginning, and the answers he was searching for were closer than he thought. And if he was wrong, if he had judged this man too harshly, the consequences would be something he would have to live with forever. The father's mind kept racing as he sat there, silently mulling over everything he'd seen and heard. Each new detail seemed to lead him down a different path, a new avenue of suspicion and uncertainty. He was convinced there was something hidden beneath the surface of this quiet diner, something that was being carefully concealed. He had to find out what it was. But as he tried to piece things together, the obstacles began to stack up, each one making it more difficult to uncover the truth. The first sign that something wasn't quite right came when he stood up to walk over to the wall where the medal hung. He couldn't shake the feeling that it had more to do with the situation than just a random piece of decoration. The father made his way toward it, his eyes scanning the restaurant as he passed. He wanted a closer look at the medal to see if there was anything on it that might provide more answers. But when he reached the spot where it had been, the medal was gone. The empty space where it had once hung was now bare, a faint outline on the wall where the medal had been. It was as if someone had deliberately removed it, just moments before he could get a better look. His heart skipped a beat. How could this happen? Was someone trying to cover up the truth? The timing was too perfect, too coincidental to ignore. He turned quickly, scanning the room for the waiter, hoping to catch him in the act of taking the medal down, but there was no sign of him. Instead, the man was serving drinks at a table in the corner, his back turned to the father. The waiter's slow movements seemed even more deliberate now, as if he was trying to remain unnoticed, trying to blend into the background. The father's instinct screamed at him to press forward, to confront the waiter and demand answers, but something held him back. He wasn't sure what it was. Maybe it was the weight of his earlier anger, or maybe it was the growing suspicion that there was more to this situation than he had first realized. As he stood there, frozen in place, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around, only to come face to face with the woman who had entered earlier, the one who had exchanged a strange look with the waiter. Her sharp eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment, the father felt a wave of unease wash over him. There was something about the way she was looking at him, something that felt both calculating and cold. "You're looking for something, aren't you?" she asked, her voice smooth, almost too calm. I would be careful if I were you. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. How could she possibly know what he was looking for? Was she somehow involved? The father took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. What do you mean? He asked, trying to mask his shock with a forced calmness. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I'm just saying, she continued, her voice dropping lower. Some things are better left unknown. Dig too deep, and you might not like what you find. She took a step back, her eyes flicking over his shoulder toward the waiter, as if she was signaling to him. Then, without another word, she turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving the father standing there, more confused than ever. Her warning echoed in his mind as he walked back to his table. What did she mean by that? Was it a threat, or simply a way to scare him off? Either way, he felt the pressure building, a sense of something lurking just beyond his reach. He couldn't ignore it. Something about this diner, about the people inside, was hiding a much darker truth. But things only got stranger from there. As the father sat back down, trying to process what had just happened, a new figure caught his attention. A man in a dark suit, his face partly obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, who had just entered the restaurant. He seemed out of place in a diner like this, his formal attire standing in stark contrast to the casual setting. The man's eyes swept the room, and for a moment, they locked onto the father's. There was something about the look, something unsettling, that made the father's skin crawl. The man didn't look like he was here for a meal. He didn't look like he was here for anything good at all. The father's heart began to race again as the man slowly made his way to the back of the restaurant, where he disappeared into a hallway that led to the staff-only area. The father's curiosity was piqued once again. Who was this man? And why did he seem so intent on keeping his distance from everyone else? Was he somehow involved in the mystery surrounding the waiter and that elusive metal? Before he could make any sense of it, the waiter returned to the table, setting down their drinks with a forced smile. Is everything all right? He asked, his voice barely audible. The father's instinct screamed that something was wrong, but he forced himself to remain calm. I was just looking at the wall, the father said, trying to keep his tone neutral. The metal. It's gone. The waiter's face didn't flinch, but the slight tightening of his jaw didn't go unnoticed. We've had it removed, he said, his voice flat. The owner felt it was time for a change. He didn't wait for a response, just turned and walked away, leaving the father staring at the empty space where the metal had once been. Something was off, and the more the father tried to make sense of it, the more complicated it became. The woman's warning, the strange man in the suit, the missing metal, and the waiter's unsettling behavior, it was all too much to ignore. There was a hidden history here, something buried beneath layers of secrecy, and the deeper he dug, the more he realized that this wasn't just a story about slow service. This was a story about betrayal, about secrets, and about people whose lives had been shaped by events no one else could understand. The tension in the air was thick, and the father could feel it in his bones. What had he stumbled onto? Why was everyone so determined to keep this hidden? And who could he trust in this place, where nothing seemed to add up? Just as the father was about to stand up and confront the waiter, a phone rang in the distance, and the sound of hurried footsteps approached. The father turned, only to see the waiter disappear into the back again, his face set in a mask of unreadable calm. But this time, there was something different in the air, something darker. The mystery deepened, and the father was left standing at the edge of the unknown, with only more questions and no answers in sight. As the father stood frozen, his mind spinning with 100 different theories, the restaurant around him seemed to grow quieter, more oppressive. The weight of the unanswered questions bore down on him with each passing second. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden vibration from his phone. He glanced down, expecting to see a message from his wife, maybe a casual check-in or a reminder about something trivial. But instead, the message that flashed on the screen was from his brother, the same brother who had texted him earlier that day. This time, however, the message was different, far more cryptic. They know you're asking questions. Be careful. Don't dig any deeper. Trust no one. The words seemed to echo in his head as he stared at the screen, the warning hanging heavily in the air. His heart sank. Had his brother known something he hadn't shared? Why would he send a message like that now, at this very moment, when the stakes had never felt higher? He tried to dismiss the rising sense of paranoia creeping in. After all, it could just be his brother being overprotective, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this message than simple concern. As he slid the phone back into his pocket, he scanned the restaurant once more, as though expecting someone to step out of the shadows and reveal the truth. But no one did. The strange man in the dark suit was nowhere to be seen, and the waiter, who had caused so much tension, had disappeared into the back once again, his absence now feeling more like a deliberate escape than a coincidence. It was as if everyone was playing some part in a script that no one else was privy to. But who was writing the lines? And why was the father being dragged into this? Just as the father was about to make up his mind to leave, to walk away from this maddening puzzle, a loud crash came from the back of the restaurant, something heavy hitting the floor. The father's body tensed, and instinctively, his eyes darted toward the kitchen door. The sound was followed by a series of muffled voices, rising in tension and then quickly hushed. A few heads turned, but the staff was trained well enough to carry on as though nothing had happened. It felt like a warning, a signal that whatever was going on behind those kitchen doors was not something for curious eyes to see. Without thinking, the father stood up, his chair scraping sharply against the floor, the noise cutting through the silence. His wife shot him a questioning look, but he didn't wait for her to ask. He was already moving toward the back of the restaurant, each step more determined than the last. He didn't know what he was hoping to find, but he couldn't stand the not knowing. As he reached the hallway that led to the kitchen, his mind flashed back to his brother's text. Trust no one. Was this the moment when everything would finally make sense? Or would it be the moment when he realized how deeply he had misjudged everything? But just as he reached the door, it swung open in front of him, and the waiter emerged, almost colliding with him. The father stopped in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. The waiter looked more disheveled than before, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his eyes wide and filled with a mixture of shock and fear. The moment their eyes locked, the air between them thickened, the tension palpable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The father's mouth went dry as he tried to steady his breathing. Was this the confrontation he had been waiting for? Was this when the truth would finally come to light? But the waiter didn't say a word. Instead, he seemed to hesitate, his gaze flicking toward the hallway behind him, as though considering running. The father didn't give him the chance. Before he could process what was happening, the waiter dropped his gaze and stepped aside, almost like he was silently giving the father permission to enter the kitchen. Something in that gesture, something about the way the waiter's shoulders slumped in defeat, made the father pause. Was this a trap? Or was it an invitation to finally understand what was really going on? Just as the father took a step forward, he was interrupted by a voice behind him, his wife, now standing in the doorway, looking both worried and perplexed. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice a mixture of concern and disbelief. The father turned to her, but before he could respond, the tension in the room shifted. A shadow moved at the end of the hallway, and the man in the dark suit reappeared. This time, his eyes locked onto the father's, cold and unblinking. The man didn't approach but merely stood there, a silent observer, his presence a clear warning. The father could feel his pulse quicken, the mystery now escalating into something darker, more dangerous. Then, just as quickly as the man had appeared, he vanished back into the shadows, leaving the father and his wife standing there in stunned silence. The waiter, still watching from the corner of the hallway, gave a barely perceptible nod, as if to say, "It's not safe here." That small gesture, so subtle yet charged with meaning, pushed the father into action. He wasn't going to walk away now, not when everything was so close to unraveling. He turned to his wife, his mind racing. "Stay here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She opened her mouth to protest, but he silenced her with a single look. There was no time for explanations, no time to go over the details. He had to go, and he had to go now. He moved past her, the weight of his decision heavier than ever. His steps echoed in the empty hallway as he made his way toward the back door of the restaurant. The kitchen, once a place of mundane orders and daily routines, now felt like the heart of something much more sinister. As he reached for the door, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He didn't know what he would find on the other side, but he knew he couldn't turn back. Not now. What he didn't expect was the sound of a phone buzzing, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere in the dark hallway ahead. The father froze. He had no idea whose phone it was or where it was coming from, but it wasn't his. And if it wasn't his, whose was it? More importantly, why was it so close to where the waiter had just disappeared into? Every instinct in the father's body told him that whatever lay beyond that door was no longer just a mystery. It was a danger that he might not be able to escape. The door creaked open with a hesitant groan, the faint sound filling the heavy silence that had settled over the restaurant. The father, now standing at the threshold, felt the weight of his own heartbeat echoing in his chest, each thud louder than the last. He knew that whatever lay beyond this moment would change everything. The dim light from the hallway flickered as he stepped forward, and for the briefest of seconds, he thought he saw a shadow flit past the corner of his vision. His breath caught in his throat, and his senses heightened. Was someone watching him, or had he just imagined it? Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to leave the restaurant, and forget this madness. But the truth was he couldn't. He was in too deep, and he had made too many connections that now tied him to a mystery far larger and more dangerous than he could have ever anticipated. The quiet buzz of the phone in the hallway was now growing louder, and with each passing second, it felt like a ticking clock counting down to something he wasn't sure he could outrun. He glanced back toward the front of the restaurant. His wife stood near the table, watching him, her expression etched with confusion. He could see the worry in her eyes as she shifted her weight uneasily, almost as if she sensed the shift in the atmosphere. But there was no time to reassure her, no time for explanations. He had to keep moving. He had to see this through. The stakes had escalated beyond a simple question about the missing metal. It had turned into something far more sinister, a puzzle with pieces that didn't seem to fit, a web of lies and hidden motives that seemed to entrap him further with every step. As he took another step into the dark hallway, he felt a sudden, cold shiver crawl down his spine. The hallway stretched out before him, longer than it had seemed moments ago. The oppressive air thickened, making it harder to breathe, as though the walls were closing in around him. He could hear the faint shuffle of footsteps behind him, but when he spun around, no one was there. His pulse quickened. The waiter had disappeared. The man in the dark suit had vanished. And yet, something told him he wasn't alone. He wasn't sure if it was his paranoia setting in, or if he had truly become the focus of someone else's game. Suddenly, he heard it, his wife's voice, faint but growing louder. "Tom, stop. Please don't. It was too late." Before he could even process the sound of her voice calling him back, a harsh, guttural shout came from the back of the restaurant, the unmistakable sound of someone in pain. The father's heart lurched in his chest, and for the briefest moment, he hesitated, uncertainty washing over him. Was it her? Was it the waiter? His stomach twisted in knots, but he didn't wait to find out. His feet moved instinctively, carrying him forward despite the rising terror that clenched his gut. He reached the end of the hallway, where the back door was slightly ajar, the faintest sliver of light spilling from beyond. But before he could push it open, his phone buzzed again. A text, this time from his wife. "They know where you are. Get out of there now." Panic surged through him as he read the message. How could she possibly know that? What was happening? A cold sweat broke out on his forehead, and his stomach churned. It was as though the entire world was closing in on him, and with each passing moment, the threat of danger grew more tangible, more immediate. His finger hovered over the screen, but before he could even respond, a figure emerged from the shadows, stepping out from behind the door. It was the man in the dark suit. His face was unreadable, his posture stiff, as though he were a predator sizing up its prey. The father's heart stopped. The man didn't say a word, he didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to convey the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a coincidence. This wasn't a matter of bad service or misplaced medals. This was something personal. "Who are you?" the father found himself asking, his voice barely more than a whisper. He hadn't meant to speak, but the question had come out before he could stop it. The man didn't answer, instead taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. The father instinctively took a step back, his body rigid, every nerve on high alert. His instincts screamed at him to run, to get out of there while he still had the chance, but he was rooted to the spot. "She told you to leave," the man finally said, his voice low, menacing. "But you didn't listen. You should have listened." The words hung in the air, thick with implication. The father felt his breath catch in his throat.
She?
Who was the man talking about? Was it the woman who had warned him earlier? Was it someone else entirely? A flood of questions surged through his mind, but he couldn't focus on them, couldn't think of anything but the undeniable sense of danger that now surrounded him. The man stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. The father could see the faint glint of something in the man's hand, a small, glimmering object that reflected the dim light from the back door. It was a knife, its blade sharp and gleaming. A surge of adrenaline flooded his body as his heart hammered in his chest. There was no longer any question. He was in serious danger. And this man was not about to let him leave. The father's mind raced. How had he gotten himself into this mess? How had this night spiraled so far out of control? He hadn't signed up for this, hadn't asked to become part of some dark, twisted conspiracy. But now, it was clear that whatever was going on, he was caught in the middle of it. The man in front of him wasn't here to negotiate. He wasn't here for answers. He was here to send a message. In the distance, the sound of sirens wailed, faint but growing louder. The father felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, help was on the way. But the man in the suit didn't seem concerned. His eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto the father's with an almost predatory intensity. "You shouldn't have come here," the man said quietly, his voice dripping with something that felt more like a threat than a statement. "And now you're going to regret it." Just as the man moved toward him, the father's phone buzzed once more. He glanced down, hoping for some kind of miraculous message that would help him escape this nightmare. But the screen only showed 2 words: too late. Panic surged, and the father's instincts kicked in. He pushed the door open with all his strength and bolted into the alleyway beyond, desperate to get away from the man who seemed determined to end this night on his terms. His mind screamed at him to run faster, but the fear and uncertainty were too much to overcome. The questions were no longer just theoretical. This was real. And the father was in way over his head. Just as the father thought he had escaped, the alleyway stretched before him, a maze of shadows and forgotten corners. His legs burned as he ran, pushing himself harder, faster, his breath ragged in his chest. The sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoed behind him, each step closer than the last. Panic clawed at his throat. There was no more running, no more hiding. The night had transformed from a simple miscommunication into something much darker, something far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. And yet, despite every instinct telling him to keep running, something deep within him couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the full story. He'd missed something, overlooked a key detail, or maybe, just maybe, there was someone or something he had misunderstood entirely. He ducked into a small side street, his pulse racing, heart hammering in his ears. For a moment, there was nothing but the oppressive quiet, the stillness of the world that had suddenly turned against him. He reached for his phone again, hoping for some shred of clarity, but as his fingers slid over the screen, something caught his eye, a message from his wife. It read simply, "I told you to stay away. You're too close to the truth." The words stung, but what really set his heart pounding was the timestamp. The message had been sent after he had already left the restaurant. His eyes widened, and a sick realization began to settle in. She had known. She had known long before he had even started digging into the mystery of the missing medal. And now, it seemed she had been trying to keep him away from the truth all along.
But why?
It didn't make sense. The woman he had shared his life with, the person he trusted above all others, was now suddenly part of the puzzle. A puzzle he was no longer sure he wanted to solve. His mind whirled, trying to piece together the fragments of information that had been coming at him from all sides. Every step he had taken, every action he had made, had been manipulated, each thread leading him deeper into a web of deceit that he hadn't even known existed. But before he could make sense of the revelation, a figure appeared in front of him, emerging from the darkness like a specter. The man in the dark suit. This time, there was no knife, no cold intimidation in his posture. Instead, he stood there, watching the father with an eerie calm, as if he had been expecting him to make this turn. "You're starting to understand, aren't you?" The man's voice was low, but there was a hint of something else in it, something closer to satisfaction than menace. The father's heart skipped a beat. How could this man know what he was thinking? What had he missed? "Your wife wasn't the only one who kept secrets," the man continued, his eyes never leaving the father's face. "But don't worry, you're not alone in that. Everyone here is playing their part in a much bigger game." The words hit the father like a punch to the gut. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice shaking now, but he couldn't help himself. He needed answers. He needed to know what was going on. The man tilted his head, his lips curling into something between a smirk and a frown. "The metal, the restaurant, your wife, it's all connected. You've been chasing the wrong lead the whole time. The real mystery is something far more dangerous. And it involves far more than just you." The father's mind reeled. He wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but something inside him told him to hold back. There was more to this than just a botched dinner or a hidden military honor. The pieces he had been putting together were merely a distraction, a smokescreen for a far more elaborate scheme. But what was it? Before he could respond, the man in the suit stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're being watched. All of you are. The ones who are really pulling the strings, they've been controlling everything from the start. You think it's just about a medal, about some slow waiter and a simple mistake? No, my friend, it's much bigger. And now you're part of it, whether you like it or not." A cold chill washed over the father as the man turned and disappeared back into the night, leaving him standing in the middle of the street, his thoughts a swirl of confusion and fear. What had just happened? What had he learned, really? He had been chasing shadows, each one leading him to another false trail. His heart hammered in his chest, but he couldn't make sense of anything. And yet, something about what the man had said stuck with him. The ones pulling the strings. His thoughts turned back to his wife and the message she had sent him. Was she really trying to protect him, or was she part of this mysterious web too? Had everything he thought he knew about their life been a lie? His mind raced as the implications set in. What if she wasn't the victim in all of this? What if she had been playing her own game from the start? And then, like a sudden, cold wave crashing over him, a terrifying thought struck. What if he hadn't been the only one being watched? What if the people who were pulling the strings weren't just after him, but after them all? The night seemed darker now, the streets quieter. And in the silence, a new fear took root, that he had only just uncovered the surface of something much larger, much more dangerous. Something that would change everything. He wasn't the one unraveling the mystery. It was the mystery that was unraveling him. As the days dragged on, the father found himself spiraling deeper into a world he barely recognized. The weight of the secrets pressing against him seemed heavier with each passing hour. Every conversation, every glance, every word from his wife felt like a riddle, a puzzle that had been carefully designed to confuse him. His thoughts swirled with fear, suspicion, and uncertainty. He had always prided himself on his ability to trust his instincts, but now, he wasn't sure who he could trust, not even himself. The chilling words from the man in the suit haunted him constantly, repeating over and over like a broken record. "You're part of it, whether you like it or not." It was clear now that the stakes had shifted from something personal to something much larger, something involving forces far beyond his comprehension. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that the answers he was desperately searching for were within reach, just out of his grasp. Late one night, As he sat in his dimly lit office, staring at the walls filled with memories of better times, his phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. His heart sank as he opened it. "If you want to see her again, you need to stop looking." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His hands trembled as he read the message over and over again. Her. He knew immediately who they meant, his wife. The woman he had trusted above all else, the person who had always stood by him, who had promised him their life together would be a shared one. But now, he was being told that if he continued to dig deeper, he could lose everything. The fear gnawed at him, twisted his gut into a tight knot. Could he really go on, knowing that the woman he loved might be in danger? And if she was involved in all of this, what did that mean for everything they had built together? He paced back and forth, his mind racing with impossible choices. He could drop everything, walk away from the mystery, and hope that his family would remain safe. But that thought felt like surrender, like he was giving up without even understanding the enemy he was fighting. He knew too much now. The veil had been lifted, and there was no going back. But there was another option, a far more dangerous one. He could confront her, accuse her of whatever he was beginning to suspect, and risk losing her forever. Could he even face the truth, knowing that everything might crumble in an instant? The door creaked open, pulling him from his thoughts. It was his wife, standing there in the doorway, looking fragile, vulnerable. Her eyes, once full of love and warmth, now seemed guarded, as if she were hiding something that had always been there but had only now come into focus. She stepped inside, her face pale, and the air between them thick with tension. The room seemed smaller, the silence louder, as she stood across from him. She didn't speak immediately, but he could feel the weight of her presence. He could sense the lie on her lips, could feel the burden she had been carrying, and it made him sick to his stomach. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. The question hung in the air, more demanding than he intended, and it made his heart race even faster. She opened her mouth to speak but hesitated, her eyes flicking to the side. "I never wanted this for you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't want you to get involved, but I couldn't stop it. I was trying to protect you, protect us. You have to understand." Protect him? From what? From the truth? From her own involvement in the mess they were now entangled in? He felt his anger begin to boil, a fire rising in his chest that he struggled to control. But as he looked into her eyes, something in him faltered. Was this the woman he had spent his life with? Or was this someone else entirely? Someone who had been hiding a dark side all along? He wanted to shout, to demand answers, but instead, he found himself standing in silence, paralyzed by the weight of the decision in front of him. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," he said quietly, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. He wanted to believe her, to feel the comfort of the life they had built together, but everything had changed. The truth had shattered him. How could he ever trust her again? How could he move forward knowing that she might have been lying to him, holding something back that could destroy everything they had? Before she could respond, there was a knock on the door. The father's heart skipped a beat. The last thing he needed right now was another distraction. But as the door swung open, he was met with an unexpected sight, a man in a dark suit, the same one who had warned him before. His wife's face drained of color, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked, a silent understanding passing between them. The man stepped inside, his presence commanding, yet somehow distant. He didn't look at the father immediately. Instead, his gaze moved slowly to the woman who stood in front of him, her face a mask of fear. "I see you've had a conversation," the man said, his voice calm. Too calm, considering the situation. "But I think you both know that this is far from over." The tension in the room thickened, as if the very air had turned to stone. The father felt his pulse quicken, the walls closing in on him. What did this man want now? What was he trying to say? Why was he here? His wife turned to the man, her face pleading. "Please," she said softly. "Just let us go. Let us fix this." The man shook his head slowly, almost regretfully, before his gaze fell on the father. "You still don't understand, do you?" he asked, his tone unsettlingly calm. This is bigger than you, bigger than your family, bigger than any of us. You've been running toward something, but you don't know where it will lead. And the truth is, you're not the one in control here." The father's heart sank, and for a split second, he felt a deep sense of helplessness, as if everything he had ever known was slipping through his fingers. Was he really this powerless? Was there no way out? He looked at his wife, saw the fear in her eyes, and knew he had a choice to make. But the truth was, no matter what decision he made, there was no guarantee that anyone would walk out of this unscathed. "You have a choice," the man continued, his gaze unwavering. "You can keep digging, but you'll lose her. Or you can walk away, forget everything, and save your family. But once you make that choice, there's no going back." The father's breath caught in his throat. He was being given an impossible choice. The life he had known, the love he had fought for, was hanging in the balance. But was it worth it? Was his family worth the truth? And more importantly, could he even protect them from the forces that were clearly beyond his control? The decision was his to make, but the consequences of it would echo for the rest of their lives. The room was suffocating now, as if the walls themselves were closing in on him. The weight of the man's words, those words about being powerless, about not being in control, lingered in the air, heavy with a truth he wasn't ready to confront. But it was too late to back out. Everything had spiraled beyond his grasp, and the very foundation of his life was crumbling before his eyes. His mind raced as the implications of what was happening started to take root. This wasn't just about him, or his wife, or their family anymore. This was about something much, much larger. There were people, powerful people, who had been pulling strings from the shadows long before he'd ever thought to investigate. He felt a cold rush of dread wash over him as his gaze flicked back to the man in the suit, who was standing like a silent specter, waiting for him to grasp the full extent of the situation. The man's eyes were calm, almost too calm, like someone who had seen the devastation of 1,000 worlds and could no longer be shaken by anything. "You think this is about you, don't you?" The words slipped out of the man's mouth like a dagger. "You think you're the key to all of this, but you're not. You never were. You're just another pawn, another piece in a much larger game." The father's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to scream, to lash out, but the words stuck in his throat. What game? What the hell was this man talking about? As if on cue, his wife's face went white, and she stepped back slightly, as if the truth had finally broken through her mask. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she looked at him with eyes full of fear. Fear that he could no longer ignore. The father's mind reeled as he connected the dots. The strange behavior, the secrecy, the late-night phone calls, the missed messages, everything was starting to make sense in the worst possible way. "You've been a part of this since the beginning," the man said, his voice low and steady. "Your wife, she didn't want you involved, but you were always in it, just like the rest of us." The words felt like a slap across his face. His wife. Involved? What the hell was going on? He turned to her, desperately searching her eyes for an explanation. But there was no answer, only the same fear that had been growing between them for weeks. The man continued, his gaze flicking from the father to his wife and back again. "This isn't just some small-time conspiracy, some petty vendetta. This runs deep, deeper than you ever imagined. The people who are pulling the strings here," he paused for a moment, letting the weight of the sentence sink in, "they have more power than you can fathom. More reach, more influence. And they've been playing this game for years." The father's breath caught in his throat. He had no idea what the hell was going on, but he could feel the pressure building. His body was shaking now, his pulse pounding in his ears. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. "You can't just walk away now," the man continued. "The moment you started asking questions, the moment you poked your nose into this, you became a part of it. You're not walking away. Not anymore." The man stepped closer, his tone colder. "And neither is she." His eyes locked onto his wife, and for the briefest of moments, the father saw something flicker in her expression, something like guilt, something like regret. It was all too much to take in at once. He had trusted her, loved her, built a life with her. But now, everything he had believed about her seemed like a lie. She wasn't the woman he had married. She wasn't who he thought she was. Before he could say anything, his phone buzzed on the table. He stared at it for a moment, feeling a sense of dread in the pit of his stomach. It was a text message from an unknown number. He opened it with trembling hands. "You're in deeper than you think. Watch your back. It's too late to back out now." His blood ran cold. He looked at his wife again, his mind racing. How deep did this go? How many people were involved? Was she the only one hiding secrets, or had everyone he trusted been lying to him all along? Then, as if to answer his question, the front door slammed open. The sound echoed through the house, sending a wave of panic over him. The man in the suit straightened, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "It's time," he said, almost too calmly. The father turned toward the door, his heart skipping a beat. He didn't know what he expected, but what he saw next was enough to freeze him in place. Standing in the doorway was someone he never expected to see, his best friend. The one person he had leaned on, the one person he had trusted implicitly throughout all of this. But the look in his eyes wasn't the same as it had been. There was no warmth, no familiarity, only cold indifference. "I think it's time you knew the truth," his friend said, stepping into the room, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "I'm sorry, but I'm not who you think I am." The father's mind spun in a haze of confusion and disbelief. What? His best friend? The man he had called family? Working against him? The world around him seemed to crumble as the truth hit him like a ton of bricks. This had never been a conspiracy involving just him and his wife. No, this was far bigger than that. And now, the very people he had trusted the most were part of it all along. He was surrounded, trapped in a web of lies, betrayal, and danger, and there was no escaping it. "You didn't think this was just some random thing, did you?" His best friend continued, his voice cold, detached. "This has been planned for years, and now you're part of it, whether you like it or not." The father's stomach churned. The words echoed in his mind, but the meaning was still too much to grasp. This was bigger than anyone he had ever known. And the worst part? He wasn't just caught in the middle. He was the target. "Time's running out," the man in the suit said, his voice sharp, filled with finality. "You can keep fighting, keep digging, but you'll lose everyone. It's already too late to stop this." The father's heart pounded in his chest. Everything was unraveling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The tension was unbearable now, suffocating in the small room as the father stood at the center of it all, surrounded by faces that had once been familiar, but were now twisted by lies, betrayal, and hidden agendas. His heart was pounding so loudly he thought it might burst, each beat a reminder that there was no turning back. He had finally pieced together the grim truth, but that only made the stakes higher. The lives he thought he could trust, his wife, his best friend, had all been a lie. They were all part of something far darker, and the walls around him were closing in with a force that felt impossible to escape. The clock was ticking, and every second that passed seemed to make his situation more dire. "Everything you thought you knew, everything you believed, is a lie," the man in the suit said coldly, his voice slicing through the thick silence. His eyes were fixed on the father now, gleaming with a dangerous certainty. "You really think you're the one who's going to expose all of this? You're nothing but a pawn in a game far beyond your comprehension." The father's mind reeled. It wasn't just about him or his family anymore. It wasn't even just about his wife or his best friend. This went deeper, far deeper, and for the first time, he saw it, the vast, invisible network of people who had been manipulating everything, pulling every string from the shadows. He wasn't just a victim. He was a part of the bigger plan, a cog in the machine they had built. And they weren't done with him yet. His breath came in shallow gasps as the man in the suit stepped forward, a predatory smile creeping across his face. "You think this ends with you confronting me?" the man sneered. "It doesn't. It never did. You're already in too deep. And there's no way out." The father's fists clenched at his sides, the anger bubbling up in him like a storm about to break. "Why?" he demanded, his voice trembling with the fury of the betrayal, the weight of everything he had just discovered. "Why me? Why us?" The man's smirk widened as he took a step closer. "Because you were always meant to be here," he said, his tone dark and mocking. "You've been part of the plan from the very beginning. You just never saw it." But it was then that the father saw something that made his blood run cold. As the man in the suit spoke, the father's eyes flicked to the wall behind him. There, hanging innocuously, was the medal. The one he had seen earlier, the one he had brushed off as a trivial detail. But now, with the pieces finally clicking into place, it became clear. The medal wasn't just a random decoration. It was a symbol, a signal. It marked the allegiance of the people behind this conspiracy. The people who had been orchestrating everything. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. The medal was connected to a network, an underground organization that had its claws in nearly every powerful institution in the country. He wasn't just dealing with a few crooked individuals. He was up against an entire system, one that stretched its influence over government, business, and law enforcement. And somehow, his family had become entangled in its web. His wife, his best friend. They were not victims like he had believed. They had been active participants, willingly complicit in a much larger operation. The horror of the truth washed over him, and for a moment, he felt as though he might collapse under the weight of it. But the moment passed, and something inside him snapped. He couldn't let this stand. He couldn't just sit back and let it all crumble. He had to fight. Not just for himself, but for his family, for everyone who was caught in this tangled mess. He had been duped, manipulated, but that didn't mean he had to give in to it. "I won't let you get away with this," he spat, his voice filled with a newfound conviction. He didn't know how he was going to stop them, but he knew he had to try. He wasn't just going to let the people he loved become pawns in this sick game any longer. As if in response to his defiance, the man in the suit's expression darkened. "You still don't understand," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "This was never about you. You're just a small part of a much bigger picture. A picture you'll never be able to see." But before the father could respond, the room seemed to shift. A sudden loud bang echoed through the house, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Someone was outside. The father's heart skipped a beat. Was it help? Was it the authorities?
No, it couldn't be. Not now.
Without warning, the door burst open and a shadowy figure stepped inside, his best friend. But this wasn't the man he had trusted. This wasn't the person he had shared years of friendship with. The look in his eyes was cold, calculating. There was no emotion, no recognition, only a chilling emptiness. "Stop, man," his best friend said, his voice flat. "It's too late for you to fight this. You have no idea what you're up against." The father's pulse raced as he stepped back, his mind scrambling for an answer. But then, as if everything were falling apart at once, another figure appeared in the doorway, his wife. But she wasn't the woman he thought he knew, either. There was a coldness in her eyes, a detachment that sent a shiver down his spine. She stepped forward, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "You don't understand," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "This wasn't supposed to happen like this. But now it's too late for all of us." The father's world shattered in that moment. He had been so focused on the immediate danger that he had failed to see the one thing he had never imagined. His wife was part of it. They had all been playing roles in this twisted game. And now, as the walls closed in, there was no way out. His heart pounded in his chest, but his thoughts were clearer than ever. This wasn't just a conspiracy anymore. It was a war, one that had been waged for far longer than he had ever realized. And in that moment, he made a choice. He couldn't take down the entire system alone, but he could take down the ones who had hurt him. He could expose their lies, no matter the cost. As the realization settled over him, the door slammed shut, cutting off any escape. The father stood in the middle of it all, alone, facing the people who had once been his family and the ones who had betrayed him. And that's when he knew the final battle was just beginning. The war for the truth had only just started, and he would stop at nothing to make sure the world knew what was really happening, no matter how high the price. But the last twist came as he turned to face them one last time, ready to fight for everything he believed in. The The door behind him opened with a loud creak, and a figure stepped in, a figure he hadn't seen in years. A figure he had never expected to see again. His father, and his father wasn't there to help him. He was there to finish what had been started long before either of them were born. The final moments of the story unfolded slowly, the weight of everything that had happened pressing heavily on the father's chest. As he stood in the middle of the room, the full scope of his journey finally hit him. The fight for truth, the betrayals, the lies, and the faces that had once meant so much to him, all of it had been leading to this moment. His mind raced through the chaos of the past few days, trying to grasp the enormity of what had just been revealed. His father, the one person he had trusted most in the world, the man who had taught him how to stand tall, had been one of the architects of the conspiracy. And yet, in that chilling moment, when his father stepped into the room and looked at him with cold, calculating eyes, he finally understood. It wasn't just about power or control, or even the lies they had built together. It was about legacy. His father had spent his life creating a world where those who knew the truth were the ones who could control it. And now, that world was crumbling, bit by bit, with every piece of evidence the father uncovered. He had thought he was fighting alone, but that was the lie he had been living. He had always been a part of something bigger. The realization wasn't just a burden, it was a call to action. The man he once admired, the man who had shaped his world, had fallen into a shadow of his former self, consumed by a vision that left no room for compassion or truth. In that moment, the father knew that there was no going back. He had to break free from the legacy his father had tried to impose on him. It was the only way to protect his family, his future, and the world he wanted to leave behind. As the father stepped forward, his eyes never leaving his father's cold gaze, he felt the weight of the final decision pressing down on him. He had spent so long searching for answers, for the truth, only to discover that the real truth was something far more terrifying than he could have imagined. The people he had trusted, the ones who had been closest to him, had all played their parts in this twisted game. They were all in too deep now. But as the room grew still, the father knew something else too. He couldn't undo what had been done, but he could make sure that the story didn't end here. He could expose everything, make sure the world saw the truth for what it was. And then, in a flash, everything changed. The door creaked open again, and this time, it was his wife, no longer the woman he thought he knew, but someone who had been molded by this same dark world. Her eyes were filled with regret, but it was too late for apologies. There was a weight in her voice as she stepped forward, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her words heavy with the weight of years spent living a lie. But as much as he wanted to feel pity for her, he knew he couldn't. There was no going back from what they had done. His best friend stood silently in the corner, watching the scene unfold with a grim expression. He had always known more than he let on, but now it was clear. They were all trapped in the same web, their lives intertwined in ways they hadn't realized until it was too late. The stakes had escalated beyond anyone's control, and the father knew that the only way out was to expose everything. As the father prepared to make his move, to take down everything his father had built, a strange calmness settled over him. He had lost so much already, trust, security, even the sense of who he was. But now, with the truth finally out in the open, he felt an eerie sense of clarity. He wasn't just going to survive this. He was going to make sure that the darkness they had all lived in would never see the light of day again. He wasn't just fighting for his own freedom, he was fighting for the truth, for a future that wasn't controlled by lies and manipulation. And then, just as he was about to speak, to make his final stand, the air in the room shifted again. The door behind him creaked open once more, and another figure appeared. This time, it was the figure he least expected, the one person who had been silent through it all. His daughter, standing in the doorway, her face a mixture of fear and determination. She had known the truth all along. She had known what her mother had been a part of, what her grandfather had been involved in, and what her father had been uncovering. But now, seeing him standing there, ready to face the consequences, she stepped forward, her voice steady but trembling. "Dad," she said, her eyes locked onto his. You don't have to do this. You don't have to fight alone. Her words hit him like a ton of bricks, and for the first time in days, he felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't over yet. Maybe he didn't have to carry this burden alone. Maybe they could find a way to put an end to the conspiracy together. But just as that flicker of hope ignited, something shifted again. A shadow passed over the room, and the father's heart sank. His daughter was no longer the innocent young girl he had tried so hard to protect. She had seen the truth, too, and now, it seemed, she had chosen her side. The door slammed shut behind her, and with it, the hope that had briefly blossomed. The father stood there, unable to move, as he realized the full weight of the situation. The game had changed once again. He wasn't just fighting for his family anymore. He was fighting for the very survival of the truth, for the world that had been manipulated and controlled by the forces in the shadows. And as the room closed in on him, he understood one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. As the screen faded to black, the lingering question echoed in the air, unanswered. How far would he go to bring the truth to light? And just before the credits rolled, a single final shot showed a glimmer of the metal on the wall, still hanging, still untouched, still holding secrets the world might never fully understand. The story had ended, but the mystery was far from over.